everyone, my name is Adam Leventhal. Welcome to this Premier Sports Network webinar with the title, Exploring the Role of Sports Sponsorship. You know who I am. Let our guests introduce themselves. Laura, take it away.
Hi, I'm Laura Angus. I am the head of commercial at Middlesex Cricket, which means I basically run all the sales and servicing of all of our sponsorship and partnerships, one of which is with Knight Frank. So I'll let Charlotte introduce herself.
Hi everybody, I'm Charlotte Wright and I head up the UK residential marketing at Knight Frank. Sponsorship forms an important part of our overall marketing strategy, so it's going to be great today to explore what we're really looking out of those agreements.
Laura, Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. Just to point out to everyone as well that Knight Frank are one of the partners of the Premier Sports Network. Laura also sits on the advisory board of the Premier Sports Network as well. Laura, I wanted to start with you in terms of the association that you try and make between Middlesex and the sponsor. What are the sort of the key criteria?
Sure. I mean, I guess each of our sponsorships are completely unique. And Knight Frank, for instance, who are a major sponsor of ours, all of our major sponsorships are structured around the shirt sponsorship, but each of our sponsors are very much looking for something slightly different. So in the first instance, before we sort of talk about the assets of what's being forming up a partnership, we only partner with brands that share our values and are genuinely invested in Middlesex and our efforts to develop the game, because ultimately that's what we exist to do. So our initial conversation with Knight Frank, for instance, we discussed the synergy between our two brands, and we also explored specifically how we could activate around those values and throughout the partnership. So for example, two of Knight Frank's values are about valuing the individual and collaborating to succeed. So in simplistic terms, cricket is a team sport that's made up of individual performances. So it's incredibly important that as a club, we nurture each of our players' needs for the sake of the whole team. So strategically, we strive to be the best county in the UK, not only on the field, but also off it. So that means for us that we want to be educating our players and offering them opportunities for life after sport. And the Knight Frank partnership offered a really great opportunity to do that. So we're working with Knight Frank to develop an educational sessions where our players from the academy right through to our first team have the opportunity to learn from property experts at Knight Frank. And then on the other side, we've also been working with the guys at Knight Frank to put on a webinar series where we use key leaders from Knight Frank and our players from varying squads to bring the sporting world to the corporate world, and ultimately what we can learn from each other. We hosted back in February one on the theme of team. We're hosting one on women in leadership next week. And then later in the season, we're discussing overcoming adversity and well-being. So really great opportunities to collaborate both for the benefit of Middlesex and Knight Frank.
And Charlotte, from your point of view, I mean, we can dig into the detail in a moment, probably. But I mean, just your overall sports sponsorship strategy, if you can outline that. I know it's a broad one, but sure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, first and foremost, what we do is we look to identify the role of sports sponsorship within the overarching marketing plan. It needs to complement all of the other activities we do in other channels to help us ultimately achieve the business and brand ambition. So firstly, identify what's the role of the sports sponsorship. Secondly, then establish actually the commercial objectives of that sponsorship and be really clear on what we're looking for in terms of brand awareness against target audiences, networking opportunities, brands that we feel we can partner with that will really elevate our positioning in the market, that really represent our values, as Laura's already talked about. Ultimately, once we've done those two things, it's then looking at the sports landscape to say, well, who are those people that we want to work with? And Middlesex is a perfect example of one of those groups of people that we do want to work with because of all the reasons Laura's outlined. And then we look to engage and ultimately put quite an individual and personalised package together that will lead to, I think, commercial success for both parties.
Laura, from point of view, I mean, obviously that's very important. You want both the sponsor and also the organization, the sports organization, to be happy and content and both be getting the most out of that relationship. In your time, how has that sort of developed, and what sort of new innovative things have you brought into these relationships?
Yeah, definitely. So I think historically a lot of sponsorships across a lot of sports, but specifically in cricket, have been driven by sort of cricket-loving decision makers who wanted to entertain at Lords. And whilst client entertainment remains a key part of sponsorship, I think brands are now looking for their investment to do a bit more, and therefore our strategy has got to reflect that. So, I mean, in simple terms, our sponsorship and branding is no longer just about the professional men's team. It now includes the women's team, the disability team, the county age group girls and boys squads, and also our participation team, who are out on the ground in the community delivering cricket every single day. So our strategy specifically has evolved to grow to two new growth pillars. The first is digital, which has naturally in the last 12 months grown exponentially. So we now have a really key focus on how we can bring value to our existing sponsors through digital. And of course, sort of for the club in general, is about developing a new and robust revenue stream through digital as well. And then I think our second key pillar is really about CSR and how this can form a really key part of our partnerships. As I mentioned, brands want their investment to do more. And what I'm seeing is definitely a shift in understanding and maximizing the good that sponsorship can do. And so at Middlesex, this means ensuring that we're investing in the work of our participation team, the work that they're already doing in the community to ultimately use cricket as a tool to unite Londoners of all backgrounds. We're launching our new diversity and inclusion action plan this week, and setting up a new foundation, which will be a really key fundraising channel for all of our work in this space. And it will offer sponsors the opportunity to get involved through sort of their existing partnerships and expanding on that. So specifically, for instance, in Knight Frank, their sponsorship and investment already encompasses all of the Middlesex teams. And with the exciting new developments, I'm excited for the impact and reach that will only grow from our partnership.
Charlotte, I can see you nodding there. I mean, obviously the breadth of that agreement, it's not just isolated into the old traditional maybe men's shirt sponsorship or boards. It's really important to have a broad range now, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is. And that was one of the major appeals of this sponsorship. I also was smiling at when Laura was talking about partnerships, because actually when we embark on these types of conversation, we are looking for that partnership type approach, not simply to be the sponsor. We want to work together to really leverage the value in these partnerships. And I also think that that links to another important point around length of term. I'm a firm believer that many of the benefits come slightly further down the road when you decide to partner together, as the brands become synonymous with one another, and you form that working group and have really clear goals and outcomes that both parties are working to.
Is that something that is part of your sort of thought process as well, Laura? That obviously, you will look at the the hard facts of, right, well, we're signing an agreement over a certain amount of time, and for the sponsor, they are looking for brand awareness. But do you factor into that we are going to have to do some sort of partnership awareness and just get the message out? And it's maybe this is a first phase, and then maybe we'll sign another contract down the line, that it needs to sort of grow organically, that relationship. And it's important for people to become aware of it over time. Yes,
absolutely. 100%. I think, the relationship is everything I do is about relationships. And I think Middlesex specifically, nothing we do is transactional. From the very beginning, it's about building a really long-term partnership. And it is a partnership because it's collaborative. And so for me, what is most important there is a genuine relationship with our sponsor, because I really think that underpins the entire contract. And I think you know, we need to fully understand what our sponsors' requirements are in order to be able to honestly assess how we're meeting their objectives. And I think even more important is adapt when we need to. And I think, you know, the key thing about that is that may be within contract. I don't think, you know, I think there's a common mistake. People will sign an agreement and think, you know, okay, job done, there's a deal there. But really that's where the work begins, you know. Sport and society is ever changing, and I think we all know that sport can be a force for good. So it's only right that our partnerships should help change that. And I think, you know, you only have to look at the last 12 months to see the shift in what we've been talking about, and how sport has played a role in supporting the societal objectives and the narrative. And, you know, that's when sponsors have the opportunity to be able to be involved. And that's where, you know, a contract might be 3 years long. And yes, absolutely, I don't look at a contractor saying, okay, we've got a 3-year deal and then I've got to go and find a new sponsor the year after. It's a long-term relationship that we're building over time. And within that 3 years, there may be elements of that contract that evolve as well. So I think that's really important.
And obviously, I suppose inherent within that, Charlotte, is that you have to think, beyond that initial term. You know, you're thinking 5-10 years down the line. So sort of innovation and coming up with new initiatives is very important. I mean, you've alluded to, you know, some of the relationship already. Are there some key initiatives and innovations that you've already worked on that you're very proud of, or things that are in the pipeline that you can give us a little bit of an insight into?
Yeah, I mean, Laura's talked about our webinar series, and we are very proud of that coming together. That's obviously a direct response of having to activate sponsorships and partnerships in a very different way throughout the pandemic. But I think what that has shown is the fundamental of the partnership, and this thing about, you know, individual talent, but talent together as a team. And we're really proud to bring to the fore our Women in Leadership webinar, which is the next in our series. So I think that's a great example of an initiative we've all come together, and that has very much been born out of a need from the pandemic. But also we do various levels of sponsorships and partnerships. One of our other partnerships at the moment is with a skier, Charlie Raposco. And we actually signed that right in the thick of the pandemic, and we've activated that in a very different way. And the digital aspect of that partnership has been really, really important. So we've absolutely been flexing our approach to what we want to see in those packages and what the commercial deliverables are.
And Laura, I mean, whilst Charlotte's mentioned it there, and I know you've talked about the sort of the extra complications of the pandemic a little bit, but what has been the main challenge in trying to secure sponsorship deals and having to be more creative due to the pandemic, in your experience?
I think the key thing is that people aren't in the ground, and so the activation that you usually would have, branding, or whether it's activation space in the ground, simply isn't there. So we're having to look at different things to do. I think we've been quite lucky. Our sponsors are really invested in Middlesex, and so it's not as simple as, okay, we'll say that didn't work out as it was on the contract. So that's that. We've had sort of really genuine and honest conversations with all of our clients, and we've worked around how we could redistribute value, particularly last season as the entire season was behind closed doors. That also aligned with our digital investment in our live stream, which gave us a whole new asset basically for our sponsors to redistribute value. But also it was about bringing our fans closer to the match, that even though that they couldn't be in the stand, they could still be involved. And I think that whole stream was really important for our sponsors, but also, for our fans, but also for delivering value that we couldn't deliver in the ground to our sponsors. So we had Knight Frank, obviously our T20 sponsor. We had additional branding and advertorial space through the stream, and then on top of that, we also used our content pieces that we were pushing out to members to align our sponsors and bring them closer to the fans. And
Charlotte, from your point of view, obviously, you know, we've discussed the brand awareness element and the good that can be done in partnerships on, you know, important issues and broadening the range of the connections with a client. But let's be brutally honest, you also need to look after the bottom line. So how do you strike that balance, and how do you sort of factor it all into these relationships that you will have?
Yeah, I think measurement and sponsorship is one of the most challenging areas, really. We take a thorough approach to channel metrics. So identifying really clearly on what we expect to see from a brand awareness point of view, from media, from email coverage, from digital coverage, right through to what we expect from the event attendees. So we have that matrix of a channel performance. What I'm looking for in sponsorships is obviously the elevation of value that brand brings, that partnership brings above and beyond the component parts. And that's the challenging bit, because that's the intangible, you know, that's the intangible bit. But I think that through working with people and through that very anecdotal, intuitive, it's the intuitive feeling towards whether there's a great fit. And I think being here with Laura, you know, we feel very, very clearly that Knight Frank and Middlesex coming together is a great fit for us. And we are confident that as long as we set the right clear goals in terms of what we all expect from that and keep focused on those goals, that is delivering value for us.
And Laura, I mean, I've sort of cut through to you know, the bottom line with Charlotte. From your point of view, with working for Middlesex County Cricket Club, for people, you know, watching online that aren't familiar, obviously they have a strong association with Lords. That's where the games are played. It is a wonderful stadium. It is the home of cricket, one of the most iconic venues in the whole of world sport. So you do have that big advantage. Do you feel almost an added pressure as well with these partnerships that you have to strike, because you are working at this sort of top end organization with Middlesex and the association with the MCC as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are an iconic brand within domestic cricket, and I think that we're an iconic brand that's amplified globally because of the fact that we play at Lords. And so, you know, we can only see that as a positive, that we're a recognized brand around the world. And obviously from a sponsor's perspective, that's a great way reason to align with us. But I think the pressure probably doesn't stem because we're based at Lords. I think the pressure is around the growth of the game in general, and the role that Middlesex as a club plays in that. And therefore, you know, all of our sponsors, all of the money that's invested commercially goes straight back into all of our activities in the community through professional and recreational cricket. So I think that that's why cricket in general is quite an exciting prospect for sponsors. We're in a really big period of growth, particularly within the women's game. It's a new regionalised structure of women's cricket. We've got the 100 starting this summer, which includes the women, all the Lords matches, for instance, the double headers with the men and women both playing it on the same day, which is amazing for the game as a whole. And I think that period of that growth is what's really exciting, because it's just going to raise the profile of all stakeholders in cricket. And I think that therefore for sponsors who are aligned to that, they're aligned to a growing game and a game that's doing good in the community.
And Charlotte, in terms of the importance of having that synergy between Knight Frank and Middlesex built within the relationship, how much sort of feedback are you getting in terms of, you know, hitting the right metrics for your target audience in this relationship?
A lot, really. We have a clearly defined project team at our end, and I think Laura made the point earlier, when you sign on the line, that's when things really begin. And actually the time and resource required from my team and the marketing teams to really leverage the value of sponsor and partner agreements is big. And I always advise the business in that way. We need the time and the focus internally to make the most of it. And that's about having really clear project teams, clear communication points, clear business support. So we're a privately owned partnership with proprietary partners. So when we take on, when we sign up to this thing, we have a very clear business partner that we work with, and clear reporting for that. And I think that is a really important aspect of when either sponsorships or partnerships do and don't work. I think that we have to make the investment our side to really, bring it alive.
And obviously, this is something that the Premier Sports Network can play a part in. On my next question, and that's getting people that work in sponsorship and marketing in different sports all together. The majority of the time in the same room at conferences and events. But we have also been running many of these online webinar and roundtable discussions. But Laura, from your perspective, how much do you learn from your own experiences working in different places, but also just looking at how different sports are approaching various different activations and relationships that they have with different sponsors?
Yeah, definitely. I think in general the sports industry is very collaborative. I know personally I'm always talking to my contacts in other sports to understand what they're doing, and what's working, what's not working, so that we can learn from each other, because often we're all dealing with the same challenges. I do think that often sports like cricket and rugby, we can fall into a bit of a trap of saying sort of football is another world, so maybe don't think about it. But actually I think there's a lot to learn from every sport, and I think speaking to other colleagues in across the industry and understanding what they're doing, we're all learning things from that. I mean, for instance, I really liked the concept that Chelsea recently launched about donating some of their digital inventory to local businesses affected during the pandemic. And I think small examples like that could be executed no matter what the sport is. So I think there's definitely a huge amount of benefit for everyone involved to be collaborating across sport. I know I've had a few conversations with some football and cricket and rugby clubs about what we can do cross sport collaboration in general, and and therefore there's opportunities for sponsors to be involved in that as well. I know, for instance, some sponsors are spending money in a number of different sports, so if you can align all of those sponsorships together, that is only going to benefit everyone. And I think also from I know I speak to a lot of my colleagues, and we're all ultimately trying to do the same thing, and that is finding new clients or making money for our respective clubs or rights holders. And I definitely like the approach of helping everyone out and introducing people to other contacts, because that comes both ways as well. So yeah, definitely I think there's huge benefit in that. And I know, for instance, obviously I've been to a number of the Premier Sport Network conferences and events, and it's a great way of meeting multiple people throughout the industry and maintaining those relationships as people move on to other sports or other parts of the industry.
And I guess, Charlotte, you can do the same. And it's a similar question to you that I've just asked Laura, that you will take your experiences of relationships in other sports and bring them into cricket and vice versa. Is that just part of the process?
Yeah, and I think in a way it's more broad for us, because whilst sports are very important to us, other aspects are as well. So is what we might be doing in the arts world, what we might be doing locally. We have a very national approach, but also we have local communities that we operate in, regional communities, and actually I look to bring all of that experience cross sector into our approach to sponsorship, ultimately with the view to how can we drive the best value out of this for both parties ultimately, and get the best impact for the spend.
And obviously, Laura, we're now looking forward, hopefully with fingers crossed, to crowds being able to return to sporting venues, and there are some events that have been scheduled and test events and things like that, but hopefully the light is at the end of the tunnel and we will see crowds flocking back to cricket, to football, to all sporting venues very, very soon. How important do you think it will be for, you know, relationships with sponsors and partners in trying to recreate, if we're not going to be full capacity, that some of these sort of activations can actually help the experience if we are a little bit lower in terms of capacity?
Yeah, definitely. I think first and foremost, we know that there's a demand for people to return to stadiums. People want to come back, which is obviously exciting for, but there is obviously the safe return that's required. And I think there's it's been quite interesting to see how some brands have activated across this space, both at home and in stadium, and aligning to that safe return. You know, we've seen brands across a number of different sports do sort of at-home packs to enjoy whilst watching the match. And I think we've seen sort of a rise in brands who have captured that moment of the safe return to grounds, and are activating around that. For instance, Dettol, you will see everywhere, and Lifebuoy, who are the new sponsor of the ECB. And so activating around that safe return, I think, helps give the consumers some a sense of safety, obviously, to come back to the ground, and ultimately a great opportunity for a sponsor to align themselves to that. I think also what has been quite clear over the last 12 months, and I think something that will continue, is all about content, regardless of whether people are in the ground or outside, watching from home or from a park or from following from a pub. Content is really, really key. And I think we've seen a huge amount of opportunity for sponsors to get involved and align themselves with that content, whether it's behind the scenes or match content. Regardless, there's a great way of engaging with fans digitally. And we know it's all being consumed. And yeah, so I think that's a great opportunity. I think another point, which is not often spoken about, but I definitely think that there's an interesting piece here about charity. And I don't know if you've seen, but I really liked what the Glenn McGrath Foundation did in Australia with the Pink Test in selling virtual seats as a fundraising channel. And I think that this is something that, regardless of the pandemic or not, it could be something that could be brought into the future, and as a fundraising channel for charities or foundations. For instance, the Middlesex Foundation, which will be set up soon, or any sponsor who's working in that space. I think it's a really great way of combining, whether you're in the ground or not, people can use the digital world for a fundraising channel.
Yeah, no, I did see that the Glenn McGrath sort of events, because obviously it's been such an eye-catching event, you know, simply due to the colour, but obviously due to the great work that they've done over so many years. And Charlotte, from your point of view, you know, obviously this deal with Middlesex was signed during a pandemic. I know we talked about it a little bit, but it must be a sort of a strange extra dynamic to have been added to the relationship, because you were almost you're waiting for it to be able to be judged in full in front of people, which is the most important thing. You know, bums on seats is hugely important in these relationships, isn't it?
It absolutely is, but I think what we've talked about today has demonstrated that it's one component of that. But actually the alignment of the brands coming together, everything that we can do around that. So innovative thinking and initiative during that signing took place, so that we stayed together, and ultimately we signed the deal, and now we can plan. So not only have we had a great time activating different kind of initiatives over the last 6 months, but now we can plan for that safe return back to stadium, and I just think the appetite is going to be huge. We know that sport is such an important part of people's lives. It's where they spend their leisure time, their enjoyment time. So I think the appetite is going to be huge, and how we facilitate that safe return is going to be very important.
And I just wanted to ask you a final question to you both. I'll start with you, Laura, just in terms of sort of having a little bit of a crystal ball moment and thinking about how the landscape is going to look over the next few years. Obviously, we want to get over the bumps in the road that are very short term and getting fans back and getting life back to normal as much as possible. But what things do you see being key over the next few years in this area of sports sponsorship?
I think the biggest growth area in sports sponsorship is going to be around CSR and what brands can do in the community, and less about their money going towards hospitality and events, and more about it going to bursaries for kids to who wouldn't necessarily have access to Chance to Shine or All Stars, for instance. Using investment to have tangible impact in the community, and I think we're going to see a huge shift in that, and that I think in some ways will be channeled through foundations or whatnot, and others will be sort of form part of existing sponsorships where a portion of the sponsorship will be donated through a foundation, or as part of a package would include some bursaries, for instance. So I think that is a huge space of growth for the game and for cricket specifically, but for sport in general, I can really see that that being a big part of it, and particularly around the agenda of diversity and inclusion. I think that'll be a huge part that both rights holders have a responsibility for, but I think every sponsor that is aligned to a rights holder does too.
Do you concur with those sentiments, Charlotte? And is there anything else that you'd like to add in terms of the future of sports sponsorship, and maybe things that are specific to Knight Frank in terms of plans for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what the pandemic has shone a light on the sheer importance of people's local communities, the places in which they live. And we want to give back to those communities. So investment in local sports and how that can feed the next generation of star performers is really important, but also the role in which sport brings in terms of people's well-being. I think well-being and the role that sport plays to that mental well-being will be hugely important. So I completely concur with what Laura has said, and those would be my builds, really.
Well, Laura, Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. I do hope that everyone watching has picked up plenty of pearls of wisdom from both Laura and Charlotte and their expertise at both Middlesex and Knight Frank. And I wish you well in the partnership that you have together, and I hope it strength to strength. So thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to you, Charlotte, thank you for coming on.
Not so. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone, yeah, no problem at all. It's been great to talk to you both. For anyone watching, you know, in cricket, but outside of cricket as well, broad range of sports are all part of the Premier Sports Network, of course. If you want more details, do get in touch with Premier Sports Network, PSN, as they like to call themselves, premiersportsnetwork.com, and they will get in touch. And of course, we hope soon to see you at one of our live events. But in the meantime, there will be plenty more webinars and roundtables to come. So check out the details on premiersportsnetwork.com. Take care.